Clergy sexual misconduct is the silent elephant in the sanctuary. It's wrong. And this project that is compiled by Sandra Wilson, Donna Briggins, and myself, Eugene Boger, in partial completion for the Bible, Gender, and Sexuality course is taught by Dr. Renita Weems. The intended outcome of this project is to present by way of videos as well as a podcast that will engage in a dialogue on this very critical subject matter. Our conclusion is that the clergy sexual misconduct is wrong, and ways that it can be intercepted is by early detection, just as indicated in the article, Sexual Addiction and Compulsivity among Clergy. We contend in this project that early training and accountability, as well as ethical training, are ways to curb the incidents that occur due to clergy sexual misconduct. We want to be clear, however, sexuality is not on trial here. The conversation that needs to take place is how to create boundaries on sexuality, because sexuality is normal. We are grateful for feminist theologians as well as queer theologians who have taken sexuality outside of the realms and the confines of marriage, so that we can have a broader conversation in the church around the subject matter. The Augustine view of sexuality that has this leans towards proclivity of purity has haunted the church and has impeded the opportunities or the progress towards having these conversations. So we believe in this project that the conversation is necessary, and we intend to engage so that we can raise the volume and piece by piece eat away at this elephant that's in the sanctuary.
My name is Joshua Kendrell Love. I was born 1983. My birthday is July the 16th. I'm self-employed. I'm a barber. I cut hair. I was 10, 11, and 12 when I was molested by a friar at St. Francis of Assisi's. My healing process is putting a smile on kids' face and show them that somebody really cares about them, and walking. I'm a barber. I do designs. I come figure I've been healing myself, so I've been cutting hair for like 12 years and walking, doing house calls. I've been doing a lot of house calls, but when I'm stable, people come to me. Well, I'm blessed with my hands because I never been to school for barber, and the craft of art that I can do when I'm cutting somebody's hair from designing, and I can still make people say ooh, because my dream was to be a football player, and I think about that and I said, man, the dream, that the things that come with being a football player, like people say ooh, that's a great catch, ooh, I'm still making people say ooh. I have a thinking chair, and I just really, I fell in love with the chair because it makes me feel like I'm still happy because it's a school chair, and I've been hurt by wanting to learn to go to school, and it just make me feel like it's gonna be alright no matter what I go through. I'm gonna be alright. It's make me strong. Like I guess there's that child inside me that still want to sit there and learn. I believe in. Yes, I do believe in God. I pray. I repent, and I do not give up because I don't want God to give up on me. You know what I'm saying? I understand that as a Catholic that was born and raised in the Catholic. That's all I believe in. Catholic is just hard to accept that that's what they do. You know what I'm saying? And that's not right. That is right is right, wrong is wrong, no matter who's doing it.
I whipped around. I could not believe that somebody was actually talking about it.
Non-abuse survivor Virginia June was at home in Ann Arbor, Michigan, when she heard fellow survivor Trish Cahill talking on CBS This Morning.
Pedophile nun is a phrase I think most of our viewers will have never heard.
It's the secret not yet told.
It was the first time I actually was validated with my story.
Facing a troubled childhood at home in the Detroit suburb of Farmington Hills, June says she turned to Sister Pat Kowicki for guidance. Kowicki taught June's religious studies class at what was then Our Lady of Mercy High School.
She seemed to be very consoling and very nurturing and very wonderful, and she became a mentor to me.
The 57-year-old says Sister Kowicki began molesting her when she was 14 years old. The first time was at Kowicki's apartment.
I knew it was wrong, and I didn't know who to tell. I was so confused. It was like this sister is doing these sexual things to me, and I thought she was married to God.
June says the abuse continued for a decade and fueled her addiction to drugs and alcohol. She claims the school and the Detroit Archdiocese failed to act when June and her family say they reported the alleged abuse in the late 80s. June says Sister Pat Kowicki denied any wrongdoing, allegedly calling June troubled. She continued to teach at the school until she died in 1994.
Well, we have been tracking these cases for about 2 years, well, not quite 2 years yet. And as far back as we have tracked is from 1988.
Okay.
So we have cases all the way from 1988, almost every year, up until the very present time, 2011.
Now, these are just Kojic pastors?
These are all cases, documented cases within, involving ministers in the Church of God in Christ, bishops, pastors, national leaders, etc.
About how many do you think in total, just generally off the top of your head, about how many do you think that you could really kind of point to right now?
We have documented 41 cases since we began tracking, and we also have about 25 cases reported to us that have not yet reached any type of legal status.
Wow.
So
in addition to the 41,
we have about 25 personal reports made to our website that have not yet reached a legal status.
Now,
as we are walking into this, what are some of the hardest parts about having this conversation, particularly as you are talking to men and women, and in our context, like I've got an audience of Christian women. Yeah. What are some of the sensitivities as we enter conversations like these?
Yeah, I think especially in church, we are taught to be beautiful and be quiet and be meek and mild. And this invitation to kind of sit silently has been ingrained from us for in such a young age. And add to that our family of origin and experience we might have had if there was dysfunction in our home and we found silence to be our only escape or our only way to even really preserve ourselves. And then you add to that faulty theological basis that say women are second, that women aren't created in the image of God, that women are not equal to men. So you add that onto it. And then you add the fact that we listen to those who are resourced. We listen to those who have power. We listen to those who have platform. So really, we as women find ourselves in these really crazy power dynamics of race, class, gender, church, family that are really were really architected for us to lose. And we wonder, how does this happen? We see a Bill Hybels, or we see a Carl Lentz, or we see even a Harvey Weinstein in both sacred and secular culture. And we wonder, why didn't anyone speak up? Where was all the people? Where were all the women who went through this? Or where were all the board members? Or where were all the other pastors? And the truth is, we have created environments where narcissism is a prerequisite for leadership. We've created systems where we have encouraged everyone to serve as puppets or TaskRabbits to the person in charge. And if it's not their way, it's the highway. And their way becomes the voice of God or the kingdom plan or the vision for the church. And lo and behold, many are trampled in the process when we are upholding one person's vision versus an equitable, equal vision where all are invited to flourish.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. And hello, thank you all for joining us for our podcast dialogue on removing the silence on the elephant in the sanctuary. Our conversation on clergy sexual misconduct. My name is Eugene Boger, and I have with me two of my colleagues, and we are going to have a very candid conversation that's both informative as well as hopefully offering at the end of this some very practical answers and practical ways to address this issue that's in the church, the issue of clergy sexual misconduct. I'm going to let our guests introduce themselves, and then we will get started. And we'll start.
Hello, my name is Dr. Donna Briggins, and I'm currently a student at the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, studying for my Master's of Divinity.
Greetings. My name is Minister Sandra Wilson. I'm also a student at ITC Gammon Theological Seminary, and my studies is Master's of Degree in Divinity.
All right. And so listen, the topic is a provocative one. And as we have titled this conversation, it's one that the church has been somewhat silent regarding. Now, the issue at hand is this concept of clergy sexual misconduct. And when you look at the research, if you look up this particular subject matter, what's interesting is quite a few of the information is centered around the Catholic Church. And there seems to be very little conversations or even studies that focus on the Protestant Church. There are some, but just seems that overwhelming it focuses on the Catholic Church. We who are on this conversation, we are Protestant clergy and persons who are pursuing that vocation. And so that's going to be the nature of this conversation, not to exclude the Catholic Church dynamic because it is prevalent, but we're pretty much speaking on the Protestant component of it. There's a couple of things I want to outline in the introduction before we get a little deeper into this conversation. Pew Research has provided information about this subject matter, the clergy sexual misconduct, and how, again, this conversation is somewhat avoided. 29%, according to Pew Research study in 2019, out of the persons that they surveyed, 29% of those who were Protestant attendees, only 29% of them said that they had clergy who actually talked about sexual misconduct. 68% of those that were surveyed said that their pastor, or minister had not talked about it at all. There's not a subject matter that even comes up. Again, this just addresses the fact that it is become somewhat taboo that we avoid this conversation. There are several, some of the largest insurance companies that insure our large membership congregations provide information on the allegations on clergy sexual misconduct. And here again, overwhelming number of allegations come up, but never get settled or settled outside of court. It is an issue. It's a prevalent issue. And as the church, we have to find a way to address it. And there are several instances. So I want to yield to our Dr. Briggins to talk about some of the examples of this clergy sexual misconduct.
Yes. Well, one of the first cases I remember of sexual misconduct was involving the pastor Jimmy Swaggart. And this took place, I believe, in 1988, and he was a popular televangelist at the time. He was involved in a sex scandal with a prostitute, and his outing actually came about because he had turned on another pastor, I think a few years before that, exposing this pastor's sexual affairs. So this pastor turns around and exposes Jimmy Swaggart's sexual affairs with a prostitute. And of course, he was defrocked and suspended. And he did make an appearance before his congregation. He was crying and pleading tearfully, begging the Lord to forgive him and forget about what he's done. And he goes on a few years later. I believe it was in 1991. He was accused he was caught in a car in California with a prostitute for the second time. And she told the police that he was in the wrong lane when the cops pulled them over, driving on the wrong side of the road. And the woman in the car did say that he solicited me for sex. So clearly this was an issue for Pastor Swaggart. But he goes before his congregation for the second time, and this time he had a different tone. He said to his congregation, "The Lord told me that this is flat none of your business." And he was again suspended, and I think his son at that time took over. Now, at the other case that I remember, what was really in the headlines during this time was involving Jim Baker, he and his wife, Tammy Faye Baker. Mr. Baker, Reverend Baker, he was accused of having a sexual affair with a 21-year-old secretary at his church. And what happened was she said that she was drugged and raped by him and another man. Yeah, so there was he eventually went to prison for illegal money laundering. I can't remember all the details of that, but he did pay the young woman. Her name was Jessica Hahn. He did pay her over $250,000 to be quiet. So these are some of the two of the earlier cases that I remember involving pastors and ministers engaging in sexual misconduct.
Yeah, it's prevalent, and that second episode is really interesting, where the clergy evidently had a conversation with God that sounds pretty unique. that clergy should not be held accountable for his actions, and so the question I want to ask before we transition to the next part of that is, what is it about? Why do you believe that this seems to persist? So in the case of Jimmy Swaggart, you have at least what we're talking about is two offenses where forgiveness has been granted, grace extended, and a repeat offender, and yet Jimmy Swaggart still continues to have a large following. So right. the first question for us to have this to talk about is, why does it continue? Why do you feel this behavior persists?
Well, one of the reasons I believe, according to the articles by Gregory and Jungers, is that there was never any preliminary training or education discussing human sexuality and the complexity of human sexuality. A lot of these pastors have never been taught to even think about their own sexual urges. I think there's been we kind of just pass over or gloss over issues of sex and when it comes to the Bible or Christianity. So it's I think it's a lack of training about education about human sexuality that should take place really in seminary before we get to the pulpit. We should have prevention education that will by the time we get in the pulpit. We already know how to talk about these issues in a comfortable and, I guess, safe manner. So it's all about prevention education.
Okay.
I also believe that why do they still support these clergy? Is because of the mindset of some evangelical and Protestant clergy members who still rely on the way of complementarian mindset, as well as misogynistic and patriarchy mindsets, that the woman is to be submissive to the men, and the men are to be the one to deem them as not being as valuable as others, and they are the ones to have the right to dictate to the women. It's a betrayal of sacred trust, and those who are in spiritual power or authority utilize that authority in a very negative way to manipulate the parishioners that they are leaders over.
That's good.
And could I just add too, because there's the trust factor involved in that, because these ministers and pastors, they have people to confide in them and trust them, and so
yes, absolutely.
they're not even challenged. They go unchallenged for years because there's the trust factor involved there.
It's true.
So perhaps is that this trust factor that's been established, is this the reason? Would you say this is the reason why there's still a significant number of followers, even after the transgression?
I think so, because they have the belief of the clergy as being holy than thou, and also the belief of they should forgive them and move on. And that is where you have a conflict. Whereas the person that is a victim, they feel ashamed, betrayed. They feel that some of them actually feel afraid to even come forward and speak out. But the way the media is portraying the Me Too movement, as well as the Church Too movement, one must speak out now. And it's time to gain their power back by doing so.
Absolutely.
Whether it's male or female.
Yeah. That piece is, I think, is critical. One of the ways that I believe that will kind of help persons to actually speak out is kind of what's already been intimated. That is for the church to for clergy to be educated in the areas of sexuality, because a trained clergy produces a trained church, for lack of a better phrase to use. Not that they are subjects to be trained, but in a real sense, the congregation, particularly in the Black church, the congregation takes on the personality of the clergy. And so clergy that are trained properly in the areas of sexuality, theology of sexuality, who can make space for those conversations around persons who are identifying as queer and the theology behind that, persons who are identifying their sexual orientation as bisexual, cisgender, and so what does God say, or how does God speak to that? And if the church does not create a space for those type of conversations, persons will not feel comfortable having or asking questions or speaking out, because it becomes a taboo subject matter. So I think that is as you mentioned, it's a critical piece.
It is. If the church leadership does not have the will to educate and discuss these matters in a healthy way, have honest dialogue, then we won't see a change. I don't believe there will be a change. But if the church leadership is really willing to address these issues and talk about them in a healthy way, we will see a decrease in sexual misconduct in the church. but it has to be on there has to be a will to do so.
I will say that I concur with you all as well. I do know with the United Methodist Church, according to 2702 paragraph of the Book of Resolution and the 2016 Book of Discipline of the United Methodist Church, they deem sexual misconduct as a chargeable offense that can actually cause that clergy member or staff member to possibly lose their licenses, their credentials, and possibly in terms become jailed or placed in prison to serve time in regards to the crime that they committed. Furthermore, in the United Methodist Church, safeguards and boundaries are placed in place initially so that those who are single and married will know the boundaries to follow and the protocol to follow if they are to become involved with a parishioner and began dating them. They are to legally notify their DS, which is the district superintendent, and or their bishop, and decide on whether or not he or she should leave. One or the other should leave the church and go to another church. We know that that can also cause a conflict with the congregation as well, but that is something to keep in consideration. Furthermore, we also have in our Book of Discipline, I believe it's paragraph 304.2, whereas we must, and we are all required as clergy to maintain and abide by fidelity of marriage or celibacy within singleness as well. So those are the things that we do have in place, and we must all have safe sanctuary policies in place as well. But we all know that gaps still persist and red flags are missed sometimes for years, many years, and you still have those predators that make their way through the cracks, even though they go through psychological screenings, they go through criminal background checks, but they still miss those red flags.
Right. And another thing that Doctors Lasser and Adams emphasized in their article regarding pastoral sex addicts, a lot of times they come from backgrounds where there was abuse.
Yes.
That is something to remember. They are human and they were children once. They may have been abused as a child, and they even project their anger onto their congregants or just carry on the behavior that they experienced when they were younger. So, I mean, it's complex. All of these issues are
very complex.
Again, that's why it's so critical that it starts early in seminary, that human sexuality, these men and women are sexual beings. They need to accept themselves as sexual beings. The congregants need to do that, and they need to learn how to deal with sexual urges. That is critical. How to deal with those urges appropriately.
That's a good piece. What do we say to the young woman who has been taught all these years that she has to suppress her sexual urges because that's not godly? Or what do we say to the young man who is wrestling with his sexual urges towards another male? As the church, do we shut that down, or do we create space for that conversation to take place so that, again, that they feel comfortable, or at least find the church as a comfortable space to have a healthy conversation about the subject matter?
I believe, Brother Boger, that Stephen's programs should be placed within the church as resources to meet the needs for sexual addictions. Needed be bring outside specialized specialists in to provide services for those areas, for domestic violence, rape victims, domestic violence, alcoholic addictions, mental health issues. I think it's very important that all churches consider providing resources for their parishioners and the surrounding community, because it's very prevalent within our nation today. Yeah. And it's very important that we know what resources actually exist out in the surrounding community to provide to those who are either inside our church or those who are unchurched and need resources to meet their individual needs or family needs.
I agree. It should be all hands on deck.
Yes.
Yeah. So how do you feel, just kind of throwing this out for a part of the conversation as a way to address what how do we handle this from a Bible study standpoint? So so is it appropriate to create a Bible and sexuality Bible study? Is there content in the Bible that will help? So we have so far, we can talk about the research aspect of it, and we can talk about creating an open space where people just have dialogue. But of course, dialogue without any type of reference can result in confusion and no direction at all. So as in addressing that, what would you say to a Bible study in the area of sexuality and gender?
I think that would be the great idea, but I also think that it needs to be incorporated in our premarital counseling sessions as well. I think sessions should be provided for couples to come in, and I've seen other churches do it, and it's worked very well to talk about issues in regards to Bible, gender, and sexuality. So I think I'm all in for the Bible study.
So am I. So I agree.
We have to be mindful that children are depending on the age level of their children, if they're a certain age, that they shouldn't be allowed to be involved in those particular types of Bible studies. But I do know that we have done an ecumenical program with other churches and denominations before by providing a youth rally to talk about sex, talk about those terms that parents are not aware of, that are heard or said on phone, kicks, Instagram, Facebook, you name it. And a lot of parents were not aware of all of these hashtags and those acronyms. I wasn't either at the time when my daughter was a teenager. We also provided, we had to gain permission from the parents, but those who are 12 and older were shown videos of STDs, what they look like, what the consequences are. We talked about AIDS, HIV. We talked about prevention of pregnancy, preventions of rape, how to avoid being, in that type of predicament, not going to parties and allowing your friends to leave you there alone and expecting to gain a ride through somebody you don't know. We talked about a lot of things that were very rich for our students and our youth today, because we know that things are just all over the television, all over the social media, as compared to when we were growing up. We didn't have that. Things that they talk about now, it was taboo during the time we were growing up. So we're in a different time frame now, and we have to speak up and speak out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't, this is where it gets fuzzy, because a lot of people believe in the inerrancy of the Bible. Mm-hmm. They go about, if it's in the Bible, and this is where it gets tricky, and you all may want to take it from here, because I know that I have been in conversations with people about this, and it's tricky.
Yeah. Well, and I think that.
I didn't mean to cut you off, Brother Boger.
I agree.
Quiet, but I think that we have to be careful when we read the Bible, especially when we're looking back at the original Hebrew Bible, because traditionally a lot of the sexual gender hierarchy mindset were utilized and believed during that time as compared to nowadays. So we have to be very careful in knowing what we interpret and what we read and how we understand it before we try to transfer that belief into society today.
Wow.
No, well, sister, you hit it. You evidently you're looking on my notes, because that is the fuzzy piece is, and it goes along with the training piece.
Absolutely.
That
the Oxford Handbook, as well as the NSRV Bible version, they clearly tell you that there's a difference then as compared to now, and we have to be really careful in our translation, because it will actually confuse someone. And I believe that's the reason why a lot of the male, the young men that exist today, the reason why they believe that they should conquer as many women as possible, because they have been taught by their uncles, their fathers, grandfathers, and they've watched them all their lives, thinking that the more women and the more females you conquer sexually, that makes you a man. And that's not the case.
Yeah. The piece earlier about the Hebrew Bible and how important it is to convey these messages on sexuality by way of research, and is critical. For example, we have a very binary understanding. When I say we, I mean the Western world. We have a very binary understanding of gender. It's male or female. That's it. If you ask the typical evangelical Christian, God made male and female. That's it. God made Adam and Eve and not Adam and Steve, and all those type of phrases. But the most rabbis, and again the Hebrew language, the gender is not binary. This Adam is not limited to a male gender, and quite frankly, it is. And as we know in research, there are almost 27 different genders. That is documented. It's not just male and female. So to have those type of conversations within a Bible study context demands someone who's trained in the Hebrew language, who's able to convey that the stories that are told from the Torah, and who the midrash is in current interpretations of that, is helping us to understand there's Adam and Eve is not talking about just one person, and then we're talking about the creation of humanity and the fluidity of that. Now, some people will have a problem with the fact that the fluidity of gender, because we need to have an answer. Mystery from the Western world, mystery is a problem. We need one or the other. We need black or white. It just has to be concrete. But in the Eastern world, we are studying an Eastern document that is developed and written from an Eastern culture, and so we have to transpose our minds to from the Western ideals to that Eastern culture to gain an understanding. And sexuality is one of those concepts that we have to actually, again, leave the Western world and transpose our minds to the Eastern world to understand how the Bible speaks to sexuality. That's the importance of the training of clergy, to be able to equip to have these effective conversations, so that people can explore in a healthy way, a non-toxic way, this issue of gender and sexuality. I think that we are getting close to our time, and I want to offer our guests last words that they would like to have on this subject matter.
Well, all I have to say is that I think prevention and education, starting in seminary, educating seminarians as well as spiritual directors, that is critical. We need to be comfortable discussing these issues. issues related to the complexity of human sexuality and sexual urges. We need to see pastors as sexual human beings who have sexual urges. I mean, we can't deify them because they are human. But I think it's just prevention and education for me.
I also believe, according to Blankard, year ETL 2002, they provided a grassroots prevention tool that they felt like was essential in utilizing with sexual addiction, dialogue, and various sexual health concerns. But I also believe that it is time for the church and the community to speak out. We wanted to remind us of the quote that Seeley on Color Purple stated. I heard it on a video that Dr. Weems gave us the honor of viewing, and it was from Reverend Dr. Otis the third. And he talked about the script, whereas Seeley was being confronted and verbally abused by Mr. And Seeley stood up and she took her fingers and she poked them out towards him and claimed her peace and gained her power back by stating that I may be poor and I may be ugly, but I'm still here and I'm alive. And I think that's what we need to do, as well as the church and the surrounding community, even in the schools, because sexual misconduct is occurring everywhere, on the jobs, in the schools, everywhere. We must speak up and we must speak out. We must also gain all of the necessary training in order to meet the needs of our parishioners, surrounding community, and we must be proactive to get things done. Now is the time to open our mouths and not remain silent on the elephant in the sanctuary.
In good old church fact, let the church say amen.
Amen.
Listen, thank you all so very much for your voice.
It is our
to
honor.
Silence this issue in the sanctuary. And our prayer together is that this conversation was informative and offered, again, practical ways to address the issue of clergy sexual misconduct, and that we would no longer be silent on this elephant in the sanctuary, that we, piece by piece, we'll be able to eat away at this elephant. Well, thank you all for joining and listening, and take care, and God bless.
Thank you. Bye-bye.